Hello, welcome back. This is number 2 in a video of command line recording sessions where we'll set up a VAMDC node. So in the previous session we just installed all the software prerequisites and the software itself. So now we'll start setting up our own VAMDC Data Node. So we're in the node software directory and we'll just have a look around. What you'll see in the main directory is the software that is common for all the nodes. You don't need to care much about this. What is really interesting for you is the subdirectory called nodes, where all the different nodes, including yours, will live. And as you see here, there are many other nodes where with different kinds of data. So here is many examples that you can look at on how to solve things for your own node as well. We'll start from the minimal node and copy it to whatever your node should be named. So whenever you see your node in the future, you'll just replace it by the name of your node. And as the same way as in the previous tutorial, we'll just run manage.py to get a settings file and use syncdb to create an empty database for now. And have a look at the settings.py file first here. So there is some documentation in the file itself which you should read. Default settings are imported here simply. There is a debug flag which adds extra debugging output as long as this is true. And the most important part is maybe the connection information to your database. So right now, as I said, it's an SQLite database. We'll change this in the next tutorial to connect to a MySQL database. There is some information from emailing that the node needs, for example, who to email when something goes wrong, and also what the sender address should be. And you can set a custom log file, for example. Inside the subdirectory node within your node, there are the 3 files that are the most important ones that you should edit. It's basically only your settings file and the 3 files that live here: the dictionaries, the models, and the query function. So the dictionaries are the connection between your database and its layout and the global names of the dictionary of VAMDC. So the queries are the same for all different nodes, however they look internally. So we need to tell the node software where in your database, for example, the atom state energy lives. So here it's, for example, within the atom states, the field energy. We'll look at the model in a second. So this is for how to return data, the returnables, and the restrictables is for understanding the query. So if somebody asks for a certain range in values, for example, in the state energy, we need to tell it which field to look at into your database. We'll edit this in the future tutorial as well in more detail. The query function is what actually executes the query on your database. So here you decide which model to start from, for example, to run the query, and then to set up the results to return to the XML functions that actually assemble the XML output. You will also have a separate tutorial about this. And the remaining one is the data model that connects or that defines your database layout. So here each class corresponds to one table in your database, and each field within the class corresponds to one column in your database. So here, for example, we have a table for the species and a table for the states, and they have an ID, and the state model is connected to the species model. So each state is within one species, and each state has an energy, for example, here. So most of the work, or some of the work that you will need to perform to set up your node, is to write the model of this, to write the full data model of your database. If you don't have a database yet, it's a good idea to start with this model, because from this model, as we saw with the syncdb command, you can create a database. So either you have already a database which allow you to automatically generate the data model file here, which we'll cover this in separately anyway, or you start from the model and let software create the database for you. Now that we have seen those files, we'll open a Python shell again and continue from what we did before, namely importing the species model. So this is exactly the class that was defined in the model file. It's empty now, so the database is empty, but now we can start manually entering a species, for example, here. If we try to save it into the database, it complains that the ID was undefined, so we'll add an ID here. And now we can save it into the database. So S1 is now an object of species type, which means that we can define a state which connects to this species by just giving it this object as the species field. We can save this as well, and if we select the objects again, we'll see now that there is a list of one object each for the species and the state table. So if we look into the index 0 object and look for the energy, we get back the 45 that we entered here. Let's look into the database itself to see how this looks on the database level. We just installed quickly the SQLite command here to look into the SQLite database. And here you see the tables that were created by Django from the syncdb command that we used earlier. We don't need to care about migrations right now, but we have the species table here and the state table here, and those are the fields that were created in the same way that we defined in the model. So if we select everything from the state table and from the species table, we just see what we entered. It's in the database, so this worked. And this is the end of this tutorial. Welcome to the next one.